recording because it is 7 o'clock. That means it's time to finish our model solar system thing that we're making. Did I hear Kane?
Kane, yeah.
Kane, so you're new, correct?
Yeah. Not new to CAD.
Cool. Okay, good. You've downloaded Fusion.
Yep.
It opens.
It opens. I have it work.
Sweet. All right, good. So actually, Kane, this will be a good kind of project to jump in on. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be drawing this white plastic bit here. So you won't have all the fancy gears in the rest of our model, but that's okay because you'll be able to draw this white plastic bit with us and learn a little bit about Fusion 360 along the way. So basically, this is like the stand for our Orrery, our solar system model here. And like I said, this is the part we're going to focus on today, and then we'll also see if we can get our moon and Earth maybe floating off on the end. Our moon and our Earth are currently floating, but we really need to mount them somehow. So let's do our base first, and then we'll move on to that wire mount for our Earth and Moon. So we are going to start by creating a new component. So up in the Create menu, I'm going to go ahead and find the New Component option there. So a component is, as you may know, is a collection of sketches and bodies and construction planes, all housed in kind of a neat little folder or component, as we know in Fusion. And we're going to call this our base, is what I think I'm going to call it, because it is all about the base. All right, so I'm making a new component. My active component is my main document component. So that means when I make this new component, it's going to make this inside of my main document component. You can see I can spin this little triangle here on my browser and see, hide or show all my components that are inside my main document component there. And I'm just going to go ahead and say OK. So everything ghosted out. Everything became kind of mostly transparent. And that's because it only shows us the things that are in our active component. So this little radio button here next to our component that we just made lets us know that this is our active component and nothing exists inside of it right now. It is totally blank. So inside of this component, we're going to create a sketch. I am going to choose to make this sketch on an existing plane here, on a surface that we already have in our model. I think that's how I'm going to do this. I'm just letting my brain hole think for a minute because, yeah, I'm actually going to make it on top of the gear. That's the way this goes. Okay, so from the Create menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Create Sketch icon here. So in general, we start by making two-dimensional sketches, and then we make those two-dimensional sketches three-dimensional. The first thing that we're going to do here when we're making a sketch is we've got these three surfaces that it encourages us to go ahead and create that sketch on. So we got to start with a two-dimensional surface, or tell our three-dimensional drawing environment where you're going to draw that two-dimensional sketch. Kane, for you, you can pick any one of these three surfaces. That will totally be fine. But for the rest of us, we want to draw on the top surface of our innermost gear. So that 52-tooth gear that is surrounding our light bulb. And my trick is I just kind of hover around the model. You know, everything is kind of ghosted out. But if you hover over the right spots, you can kind of tell what surface you're highlighting. Because in addition to those three drawing surfaces, You can draw on any flat surface. You can create a sketch on any flat surface. So I'm going to pick the top of this gear as my drawing surface, and I'll just spin around to look right down at that. Yeah, indeed, I'm on the top. And thankfully, it put the origin right at the middle of my gear here. Now, if you don't have an origin right at the middle of your gear, you may need to project a circle that exists. So we've got a center point, because we want to make another circle that is concentric with our gear here. So if you don't have a convenient origin like I have here, from the Create menu, we can go ahead and choose Project Include. And then Project. And we try to keep this pretty informal, so if you have questions, shout them out for sure.
I'm familiar with all that.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to project over just any one of these circles that I can get to highlight that is concentric. So we have a lot of concentric circles here, from our light bulb to our 52-tooth gear to the frame underneath it. I just need one of those circles to project over, and then I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So now I know I have a center point there that is going to be, I can use as a common point here. Because now I'm going to make a circle. So from our Create menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose the circle option, and then the center diameter circle option. And I'm going to choose to make a center diameter circle of a size that I totally remember, because I was not frantically building an airplane just before class today. I want to say this is two.
Would you like a digital caliper?
Yeah, if you have, or that'll work too. That'll work just fine. Yeah, thank you. My highly. This will be just fine. Yes, it is 1 7/8. And that sounds right. As you may know here in Fusion, you can type in measurements in a lot of different ways. So if I want to type in 1 7/8 of an inch, I can do that. I can also type in 1.875, which is 7/8, I believe. And that is a totally fine way to do that as well. So 1 7/8 is the first circle that we're going to make. And the second circle that we are going to make is 2 1/2. So we're going to go up to the Create menu again. I'm going to make yet another circle. This circle is a center diameter circle. It is going to be 2.5 inches. And then the last circle, I'm just going to kind of place these measurements. I can click and drag on these measurements and I can move them somewhere else. Just because inside of the circle, for me in this case, it's kind of jumbled. So sometimes I like to move these where they're easier to read. And then the last circle that we are going to make is going to be the smallest circle, and that is 1.5 inches. So we're going to make one last circle, also concentric with the other 2 circles. That is 1.5 inches. And I'm just going to neaten up my measurements here. People know I like to try to keep my drawings organized. We've been doing a pretty good job of organization here with this project, so try to keep up that streak, that winning streak. All right, cool. So now I'm going to go ahead and say finish sketch. So now we've got a sketches folder here inside of our base component. And if I turn the little triangle next to that sketches folder, there's a sketch here that I can name. So I'm just going to click one time, pause, and then click a second time. And now I can rename that to circles, or base, or profile. There's probably any number of names that you could go with, but anything is better than sketch 1. So I think it's also going to be the only sketch we need to make for this, which is convenient. All right, so now we can extrude some bits. So let's go ahead and start by extruding. I clicked finish sketch, and I'm going to come up to my create menu, and I'm going to choose the extrude option here. And I'm going to extrude, for me I have to click on 3 different things, but I think that's because I've got that projected circle in there. Let me just verify that one of those lines is purple. Yeah, so because there I get a little purple line in there. I'm curious. I wonder if you can make a projected line into a construction line? Let's do an experiment. Look at that, you can. So that's kind of fun. So here's what I did is I needed to, I guess I didn't really need to, but I had that projected circle that I had made, and a solid line, maybe I should change it back so I can demonstrate for everybody. A solid line divides up a surface here. So this is my projected line that I just used to find the center point here of my of the center of the solar system, and this the center of the sun is right there. In case you're looking for it in your flat Earth world, it's right here. And so that projected line just divides up that, and it makes it a little bit confusing. Sometimes I'm like, oh, am I supposed to be picking this one and this one? And maybe I wouldn't get the right things to extrude because there's a lot going on there. But if we right click on the sketch that we just made, so either here in the sketches folder in our browser, you can right click and you can say edit sketch, or down here in our timeline, so down at the bottom of Fusion 360, we've got this kind of timeline of events, and I can right click on that sketch icon in the timeline and say edit sketch. And now if I highlight the purple line that I'm projected over from existing geometry, and I push the construction button here in my sketch palette next to where it says line type, it'll change that line to a dashed line. So now that that line is a dashed line, if I click finish sketch, now when I come to do this extrusion here, that dashed line isn't going to divide my surface up, so I won't accidentally confuse myself here about which things I need to extrude. But we do indeed want to extrude. I digressed a little bit there, so Fusion 360 is full of tangents and lines that they are tangent to. So we are going to extrude up that little ring. I believe it goes up 1/4 of an inch, because that's the way my brain works, is I think using the imperial measurement system, which is like the other measurement systems except worse in most ways. Nope, I lied. It is 3/16 of an inch. Although I suppose there's no reason it couldn't be 1/4 of an inch, but why not make it the exact same as the one I have? Not 3/32, 3/16. So 3/16 of an inch is our distance. We're making a new body here, and I'm extruding this up. So I'm going up away from the surface of my gear here. And I'm going to say okay. All right, now I want to do another extrusion here. I want to extrude out just the intersection of those concentric circles that I made. But right now it's difficult for me to do this because there's a lot of other existing geometry that's just kind of in the way. It's kind of hard for me to highlight the circle that I need to. So what I'm going to do is first I'll spin down the triangle next to my bodies folder. Now that we've created a three-dimensional object, we've got a bodies folder, we've got a body to name. This body is going to be, it's going to be the base. This will eventually become the base once we join things to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and name that the base. And then I'm going to toggle off the visibility on that base. So once I turn off the visibility on the base, it's easier for me to highlight the sketches that kind of exist on the other side of that three-dimensional object there. And I can extrude out yet again. So from the Create menu, I'll go ahead and choose the Extrude option. I'm going to highlight that very middle circle there. Normally, or the standard way for us to extrude, and I'll tell you what, once we have the selection, the profile selected here, we can turn back on our base body if we want to. So it's just the selecting of the body that makes it difficult, and why it's handy to be able to turn off the visibility on that. But you can turn it back on afterwards. And we're going to go up a distance of 1/2 of an inch. We're not going to do a cut operation here. Instead of, the default here is changing to cut because we are extruding through an existing three-dimensional shape. So it defaults to cutting away from that existing three-dimensional shape. We actually want to join to that three-dimensional shape. So we're going to join to that ring that we made down below here. And I'm going to extrude up a distance of 1/2 an inch, but I also want to extrude down a distance. So instead of my direction here in my extrude window that I've got going on, instead of my direction set to one side, I'm going to change that to 2 sides. And now this number I remember because I believe it was 4 inches. Yeah, so we're going to go down from there. Yep. 4 inches. This has to be really long because the light bulb sockets that I found on Amazon just are really long. So you gotta have room for our light bulb to stick out there. So that's why this is such a long base here. It also occurred to me that we might be able to expand this later with, adding another planet around the outside at some point. So food for thought. All right, but we are joining these items together. We're making a nice long piece. We're joining it to our base, and I'm just going to go ahead and say okay. So let's do one final extrusion, and that final extrusion is going to be for lack of a better word, for the nut. So eventually, this cylinder is going to get a big, huge threaded profile on it, And then to clamp down, to hold our piece on there, we're going to have like a nut that threads all the way on there. So let's go ahead and make that nut right now. I'm going to do that by turning off the visibility on my base, just so we don't, so it's easier for us to highlight the right sketch profile here. I'm going to go ahead and from the Create menu choose the Extrude option. And I'm going to pick the very outer ring there. Now, instead of extruding this, we're learning we're getting all sorts of tips for the Extrude menu here. So normally when we extrude from the profile plane. So like if I go up, make it 3/16, just like the upper one. Are they the same? Close enough. Yeah. So normally it extrudes from the profile plane, right? But in this case, I want to extrude that nut and just have it live down below here. So instead of extruding from the start, that is the start of my extrusion being the profile plane, I'm going to change that to an offset. And that offset, I'm just going to make like -1 inch, just so it's down there. It doesn't need to be anywhere in particular down there. When you screw it all together in meat space, it will need to be in a particular area, but it'll all be threaded and you can just put it wherever you want to. So I just want it to exist down below my gears somewhere. I'm making this a new body, so we don't have our base turned on. Now if I turn on my base, the default will change to join, because it says, oh, this object directly touches another object. So let's go ahead and join those together for you. If you do have your base body turned on, you can just make sure that instead of join in the operation, then you're set to new body there. Cool. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on OK.
What was the amount?
3/16.
3/16.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now I've got a body to name in my bodies folder here. I'm going to call it the nut, or screw clamp, or ring. I guess you could call it the ring also, but anything is better than sketch tube. And now I'm going to turn off my sketch just so it gets out of the way, because I actually don't think I need to use it anymore. Famous last words. Yeah, I don't think I need to use it anymore. Cool. So the next thing, how are we doing so far? Everybody good at home? We're good here? Keeping up-ish?
Yeah.
Kind of following along? Okay, good. And we're good at home? Thumbs up at home? Cool, cool, cool. All right, good deal. All right. So we're going to go ahead and add our threading to this big, huge structure here. So from the Create menu, threads are really easy to add. So if I come up to the choose Create and then the Thread option, we get our handy dandy thread window that pops up. I'm going to do something real quick. I'm going to try doing this. Sometimes if I mess with my settings, my contrast comes back. That might be a little better. Alright, so I'm going to choose the face that I'm going to select here. And for me, the first face I'm going to choose is this big, huge 4-inch section there. you can see that it defaulted to a thread size, and it just made it whatever standard thread size was close-ish to the current diameter of that cylinder. And 1 7/8 is a fine thread size for us. Will be phenomenally adequate. But we do want to change it from, we do want to make sure we hit the little modeled checkbox. So that checkbox is what allows it to be printed when we go and print this. If it's not checked, it's just kind of like the impression of a thread. It's not actually a three-dimensional thread that's in there. We don't need to make this a full length thread. So the little checkbox that says full length here, I'm going to uncheck that. And if so now we have a whole bunch of arrows here. We've got 2 arrows that move up and down. So one is the location of the bottom of the thread. Now the bottom of the thread needs to go all the way to the bottom, because we need to be able to get our nut on from the bottom. However, the top of the thread doesn't need to go all the way to the top. So we can have like a 1/4 of an inch gap or so at the top of our piece, and that'll ensure that when our actually it should be slightly more than a 1/4 of an inch. It should probably be more like 3/8. That when our gear and frame are rotating around here, it's got a nice surface to rotate on. You probably don't want it to rotating directly on the threads, because they may not be perfectly concentric over the space of just a 1/4 of an inch. So I gave it a little flange there, I guess you could say, at the top, or a shoulder to rest on there. So 3/8 of an inch from the top goes all the way to the bottom. It's a 1 7/8 inch thread, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK. All right, that looks wonderful. Now we just need to thread our nut. So I'm going to do it the exact same way, except this time I'm going to turn off the visibility on my base body. So if I turn off the little eyeball next to my base body there, now it's easy for me to see that surface on the inside. So when I come up to my Create menu here, I can go ahead and choose the thread option. And I can choose as the face that I'm going to thread that inner face from my, what I called my nut, could be called your ring. I'm going to turn on the little modeled checkbox, and usually it defaults to whatever the last size you used was, but it's always a good idea just to kind of keep an eye on this thread size, like, oh, 1 7/8, that's definitely what I was going with for a thread size before. Well, here there's a remember size checkbox. That's kind of interesting. I've never actually used that before, but I'm not sure what that does. Use at your own risk. Remembering the size sounds like a good thing. If I just, sometimes Fusion has really great tooltips, and if I just hover my mouse over something and then stop moving it, but not in this case. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Now we've got 2 threaded objects here. However, from experience, and Mike, you could probably, you know this experience too, Like when you 3D print a object that needs to thread into another object, you need a little bit of, you gotta have a little room for Jesus in there. So you slip your phone book in there and keep the kids from dancing too close together. But we're just gonna use the push-pull command instead. So let's see if we can illustrate this first. So we can, from our inspect menu, choose this option called section analysis. So what this section analysis tool will allow us to do is to choose a surface. So I'm going to pick one of these vertical surfaces that'll split my cylinder in half. So it says, hey, pick a surface, pick a face. So if I choose that face right there, you can see that it's kind of given us a cut in half view of our model here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And I'm going to zoom in here, and you can see there's not a whole lot of space in there for those threads. There's not a lot of tolerance in there. You need a little bit more tolerance in a 3D printed thread than you would a machined one. So let's go ahead and add that little bit of tolerance now. The way that I choose to do this is from the Modify menu, I choose Push-Pull. Press-Pull, sorry. And then I'm going to zoom in because I want to highlight it doesn't really matter which side you choose to do. So I'm going to choose to do this all on the nut side. So I'm going to highlight a face on my nut that represents kind of like that shelf. And then I'm also going to highlight a face on my nut that is the outside. So I've kind of got the top and bottom of that thread profile in there. And now if I offset it by a negative 0.01, which in like machinist world is a country mile, but in 3D printing world is on my printer just right. So works out just right for me. So negative 0.01 inches, 100th of an inch. And then I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And now I'm going to do that one more time. So from the Modify menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Press Pull option again. And this time I'm going to choose the ring that is just like that straight up and down vertical part of my thread profile here. And same deal, negative 0.01 inches, approximately 1 country mile. And that'll just give it enough room. Actually, does that thread? Yeah, that makes sense. And then I'm going to say OK. So you can come and check out this thread here and see that it's still pretty tight. But you gotta have it, it's got to be able to thread on there. Otherwise, it doesn't count as a thread if it doesn't thread together. So, cool. We have a section analysis folder here that for some reason it has made my section analysis folder in my main document component. So it's not like inside of my base component. I'm not sure why it does that. I would imagine it would have made it in the component, but I am going to name this analysis. So this is my thread close-up. Just so there's something labeled there. so we know what exactly were we analyzing when we turned on that analysis, because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it off, because I actually don't need to look at it anymore. I just wanted to visualize the inside of my thread so I can do the right tolerance there. Alright, cool. So that is our base form here. Now let's go ahead and let's make I think we have time to do our mounting mechanism for our Earth and our Moon. So I'm going to go ahead and make my main document component my active component again. And I'm just going to click on my moon because I don't remember where I put it. So while we were keeping things organized, it looks like I put both of my moon and my Earth inside of my last gear. And the way that I can tell that I've done that is when I click on the body, I see a little highlighted blue dashed line. Yeah, it's easy to see there. On this component right here. So let me unhighlight it, and then if I click on it, you can see that little blue dashed line appears right down there. So if you're not sure what component you've got a body in, if you just click on the body, it'll highlight what component that's in, and then you can spin down the little triangle and see that, oh, the bodies folder has the little dashed line underneath it. So I can spin down that, and then look at that, I've got a body here called Earth, and then I've got a body here called Body 1. I'm going to call it the gear, and then I've got a body called the Moon. So now that I know what component all that stuff is in, I'd like to add my wire that we're making here so they're not floating, because we abide by the laws of gravity here in this class at all times, and if these orbs are just floating, they will fall. So we'll need to go ahead and make that our active component so we can draw a wire connecting our gear to our Earth and to our Moon. So let's do the hard one first, the moon. The way that I'm going to choose to do this is I'd like to use the pipe command. Why? Because we don't do it very often, and the pipe command is pretty cool. So the way the pipe command works, or the way this pipe tool works, is it will create a pipe shape along any path, any sketch path that you make for it. So I'm going to start by making the sketch path. So from the create menu here, I'm going to go ahead and choose to create a sketch. Again, I've got my helical gear 14 tooth. My 14 tooth helical gear is my active component. So that way when I make this sketch, I make it inside of the sketches folder, inside of my 14 tooth gear component here. And I'm going to pick, gosh, I really don't have a good plane here to pick. So the way that I'm going to do this, I'm just debating in my head whether I want to talk about 3D sketching or not. Have we talked about 3D sketching at all in this class, Mike? Do you recall? You may remember.
I think on your money gun.
Oh yeah, maybe you're right.
You just kind of cursor through it, and as I recall, it kind of went overhead.
Okay, cool. So let's give that a try here. So I'm going to choose to create a sketch. None of these planes really go through my moon. And in order to connect my moon to my gear, I really need a plane that goes through it. And I don't really have that. Now, I could mess around trying to make a plane from things in the construction menu here. But instead of doing that, I'm going to pick just one of these planes. Doesn't really matter a whole lot which plane you choose. Because we are going to turn on something called 3D Sketch. So in our Sketches palette here, in fact, tell you what, so normally when we make a sketch, you know, we draw a line, and it would like come up, and it would connect right to our Earth, right there. So, cool. That is the path that we could use to make a pipe that goes to our Earth here. Now, if we want to make a pipe that goes to our moon, if I draw a line off of that first line that we made, like maybe at the halfway point here, because that makes sense, and I just draw a line over until I get close-ish to what looks like underneath my moon, and make a little stopping point there, and then I draw a line that goes up into our moon, or from this perspective, what looks like into our moon. If I rotate my view, oh, look at that, it is in our moon. I picked a really bad plane to illustrate this, because mine goes right through there. Does your sketch go into your moon? Not really? Here, I'm gonna click finish because I could do a worse job of making that sketch, and that was kind of the point. So here, if I turn that on and I turn this joint, oh, the sketch is gonna rotate. That's a good thing, but not when you're trying to talk about three-dimensional sketching here. So I'm gonna do Command Z a couple of times, and I'm gonna get back to before I had made a sketch, and I'm gonna choose a worse sketch to make that, a worse plane to make that sketch on. Alright, so now I can say create sketch. I'm gonna, oh boy. Alright. Definitely pick a bad plane to make that sketch on. And now, just like before, I can start by making a line that goes right up to my Earth. Right, so I've got a line that will be a adequate path to make my pipe on that connects my Earth to my gear. However, it's very difficult to, it's not just very difficult, it is impossible to draw a line on this plane that connects my moon to this Earth here, and that's because they don't exist on the same plane here. The way that you can make them or draw out in the middle of nowhere, not on a two-dimensional surface, is if you turn on the little 3D sketch checkbox. So I'm going to turn on that 3D sketch checkbox at the bottom of my sketch palette here. And now, if I make a line, it will let me sketch out away from the plane that I was drawing on. So now I can make lines that connect my, oh, look at that, it didn't. Why didn't you? It was just doing it from that perspective. But can I force it to be coincident to? This is what happens when I go off the reservation and I start just doing stuff. Here we go. That's what you gotta do. So this line is still existing, kind of like on my sketch plane, but you can see it didn't connect my moon here. While I've got my 3D sketch checkbox active, if from the modify menu I choose the move tool, are you following? Kinda?
I was trying to backtrack and add an earth and a moon.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. So we can, with that 3D sketch checkbox checked here, I can highlight this line, and even though we're editing a sketch, I now have the kind of move tools that I would have like in a 3D space. So I can highlight that line and I can just look from the top down and I can move it right over so it's going up inside of my moon there. And then I can say OK on my move window. And that just goes ahead and it's got that line moved in place there. So 3D sketch is a handy thing to be able to check every once in a while if you don't have a plane that's going to line up right. I'm going to add, just because I know from experience, the pipe command does not like to make right angles at all. So from the modify menu here, I'm just going to choose to add a fillet. So it's the very top option, modify and then fillet. And I'm going to choose the 2 lines that I want to make a fillet from there, and I'm just going to make like a 1/4 of an inch fillet. Whenever I do a 3D sketch, I always make sure that before I click finish sketch, I'm going to turn off the 3D sketch checkbox. And that is because if you leave the 3D sketch checkbox on, the next sketch you make will be a 3D sketch. And when you select the plane, it can be easy to draw in weird ways. So I just think it's kind of best practice to get into, like, all right, I'm done sketching in 3 dimensions now. Let's go ahead and turn off that sketch checkbox, and then I'll click finish sketch. All right, so now that we've got our paths made here, the very last thing we need to do is to add our pipe. So from the create menu, I'm just going to go ahead and choose the pipe tool there. I'm going to do this a couple of times, so I'm going to do the pipe tool on that first line that goes up into my earth. I'm going to make this a new body, and the section size is just going to be just like 1/8 of an inch. So just a little 1/8 of an inch rod that'll go into my earth to hold it on the gear. Make it a new body, and I'll say OK. And then from the create menu again, I'm going to go ahead and choose the pipe tool one more time. This time I'll pick that curved line that goes over into the moon, and I'm going to make this a new body as well. It remembered that 1/8 of an inch section size there. Honestly, 1/8 of an inch is probably way overkill for holding up these tiny little bodies here. But the nice thing about Fusion is all parametric, so if later on I come back and I want to say, hey, that pipe command down here in my timeline where I made this pipe, if I highlight it, you can see that it highlights in my drawing view. If I right click on it I can say edit feature, and then I can go, oh, now it's not 1/8 of an inch, it's 0.0625 inches. It's a 1/16 of an inch. And then say okay. So I'm going to make our main document component my active component again, just so I can kind of zoom out and do a little show off shot here. So we've got all of our joints animated. We've got our mounting screw there, so we could like choose to mount this on something, and then you could like hang it on your wall, or you could mount it. I thought about mounting it inside of a coffee table, and you can have a nice little Orrery model inside of your coffee table, just rotating around. And here's what it looks like in the real world. So it just rotates around. Of course, I don't have my Earth and my Moon sitting on here because this is just a prototype. Because in the next class, we're going to talk about making this thing. So we're done with the design. In the next class, we're going to make a bunch of G-code for all these gears, because it's the makerspace and we like to make stuff here. So that's it for the design section. We'll do one more class, hopefully, where we go talk about tool paths, and we will leave the comfort of our design workspace and enter the dark side of Fusion 360 known as manufacturing.
Something more.
And making tool paths and stuff, contours and pockets and slots. Oh my. Cool. Any questions before we wrap it up? All right, beautiful. Then we will see you next week when we will all be super excited here at the Makerspace, because we just had the most successful flight of any plane ever made here at the Makerspace. That's an accurate statement.
We will have one Flutog.
Yes, we will have flown the Flutog. We will have flight aid.